Hernan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Let's see. So, where do we begin? I guess, first of all, I'm happy you're here. I appreciate your willingness to do the podcast. You're somebody that, from the moment I met you, has just had this great aura of hospitality about you.
No, thank you.
You've always been a professional and just a gem. So, happy to have you here. Happy to hang out with you outside work. We're going to drink wine. We're going to get drunk. We already drank like 6 things. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't tell them. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they'll know at the end. When I slur, I always slur at the end. Nobody listens that far, so it doesn't matter. So let's see. You and I met at Holbrook House, which is where you're at currently. It's been a little over a year, almost a year.
Yeah, it's going to be a year in September.
Of course, there's going to be a big party.
There is going to be a big party. Yeah, it's like
Okay.
600 people. So.
Wow, awesome. That's great. Okay, cool. So aside from that, I know that you've lived in other places, but do you want to kind of give us a little rundown of your background, where you're from, and how you came to be at the Holbrook House?
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay. So I'm originally from Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I was born there in central Mexico, San Miguel de Allende, which is like, a really beautiful colonial town. A lot of expats live there, so there's a big expat community there. And my mom met my stepfather there. So from there, we moved to Texas. So I lived in Dallas for a while when I was growing up.
I didn't know we were both Texas people.
Yeah, sort of Texas people.
Well, I spent
a
decade in Texas. We're not Texas people, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was there from like 8 to 12, more or less, and then moved back to Mexico for, health reasons with my stepdad. We moved back to kind of did back and forth a little bit. But, definitely have a lot of memories growing up in Texas and playing Little League and, kind of all that good stuff. But then eventually, went to college in Mexico in another town called Querétaro, which is not too far away. I studied communications. I wanted to be a filmmaker. So that was kind of like my first passion was film, and was very nerdy about it and like super intense, and I was like, I'm gonna be the next Scorsese, and that's
All right.
I was gonna be a director.
Yeah.
So I studied that, and then in college I did an exchange. So I went and studied abroad. I studied in Madrid for a year, and I think that's what kind of like really started to change things and tip things in a different direction. I ended up meeting somebody there and followed her to France for a year. So kind of like put my studies on hold, went to France. So then, all of a sudden it'd been like 2+ years that I was in Europe. And that definitely kind of, taught me a lot. Came back to Mexico to finish my degree. And then in that kind of like interim, decided to do another exchange and went to Canada and lived there for 6 months in Montreal. And then finally graduated. And of course, I was like, oh, well, let's move to New York City because, I had visited it while I was, still in college. And I was like, this is the place for me. Like it has such a great energy. Like there's a lot of like great film there. So like, definitely a place where I can grow. So I decided to go to New York. Got there with, I think I literally had $1,000 when I got to New York City. Like that was it. That was like all the money I had. Right now I think about it and I'm like, how did I survive?
Scary. Yeah. $1,000 is like 2 good dinners now.
Yeah. So, made it happen, worked kind of odd jobs, tried to do the film thing, did it a little bit, did some projects there. But at the end of the day, I was like, just the whole process of what it takes to get to a final product was so exhausting. And there were so many variables that weren't necessarily in your control, and you would spend months and months and months working on something that could be easily messed up by like a small mistake that maybe I did, somebody else did, whatever the case might be. So I just felt like it was too taxing emotionally to a certain degree, and in the meantime, to pay my bills, I had started working in restaurants, and I worked in restaurants growing up to just during college to get some extra money, etc. So I had been doing that in New York and, worked at a pretty casual, like Mexican restaurant. But I kind of sat down one day and I was really thinking about it, and I was like, okay, like, what am I doing? Am I going to like continue with my pursuit of film, or am I going to try to do something else. And that got me thinking. I was like, well, I work in restaurants like 40 plus hours a week, and I feel really happy when I do it. You know, like I like the interactions. I really, you know, enjoy kind of just the feeling of being around other people. I think that might be what I want to do. I think I might want to take this seriously and see if I can make a career out of this. So as soon as I made that decision, you know, I was like, okay, well, I need to go somewhere that's really great. And I didn't know that much about restaurants at the time, but I knew that Michelin meant something. So, you know, kind of was looking around on Craigslist, and there was an open call for this, you know, 3 Michelin star restaurant called 11 Madison Park.
Yeah.
And, you know, now I realize that that's pretty rare that they do open calls like that.
Yeah.
So I went, you know, I interviewed. I sat down with the first person that interviewed me was the AGM at that time. And, you know, he talked to me and he was like, okay, just wait a second. So, like, you know, I waited there, and then, you know, the GM comes over, which was Will Gadar, and he sits in front of me, and, you know, he's like, why do you want to be here? Like, what, you know, you have some restaurant experience, but, you know, we have people that literally went to hospitality school.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like,
Yeah.
why do you want to be here? And my answer at the time was, well, you know, I want to learn the very top end of things, and that way, you know, I know the best, and then I can, you know, go and do something else after that. And he's like, well, we just opened up Nomad if you want to try that. And I was like, no, I want to be here.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, okay. He's like, come back. And, you know, I think it was like a week after or something, you know, come back at this time. At that time I had long hair, and he just looks at me and he says, and what are you going to do about your hair? I was like, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I don't want you to do anything. You do whatever you want.
Yeah,
you know, I'm like,
yeah.
wink, wink. And I was like, sure, no worries. I'll take care of it. So then that kind of started my, I would say, like the serious phase of like me being in the hospitality industry. And I was there for 3 years, worked my way up from, you know, what they call a kitchen server, which is basically taking plates from the kitchen to the table. And then worked my way up to captain there. And then afterwards, you know, once I decided to leave, I went into management. So ended up working at some, you know, pretty nice places in New York. I went and was the manager at Maison Premier, which is a James Beard winning cocktail bar. And that kind of furthered my love of, you know, beverages in general. And after that, I was the general manager of Cosme, which is an, you know, incredible Mexican restaurant. And then after that, I went and opened up a restaurant in the Hamptons, which was an odyssey, you know, as it usually is. And came back to the city at the very end of 2019. And the pandemic hit, everything shut down. I was like, what am I doing here? At that point, I've been in New York City for 10 years. So I was like, what am I doing here paying, you know, crazy amount of rent for this small room, and I can't do anything. There's nothing around me that, you know, I can really enjoy right now. I didn't know where the industry was headed. I was kind of just debating, and then I had a friend call me, and he's like, hey, I'm opening up a restaurant in South Carolina. Do you want to be my business partner? And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Of course I want to open up a restaurant in June of 2020 in South Carolina. Like that, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So, you know, took a leap, decided to do it. Restaurant's still open, so like that's great. But, you know, after a couple of years in South Carolina, I met my now fiance, and, you know, we kind of both wanted a little bit of a change. So she ended up getting a job here in San Francisco, and that's kind of what's led me here. But yeah, started off at Cotogna here in the city, and then had the opportunity to, you know, I heard about Holbrook House, and I, you know, went, talked to the owner. I saw the space when it still wasn't, you know, completely built out, and he was talking about his vision for it, and like, you know, like all the little details that were still kind of being set in place, and it just really captivated me from the very first moment, because it's such a beautiful space. It's you know, they've put so much love and work into it, and, you know, it's really a project that doesn't come along too often, right? So I was like, yeah, I want to do that, and yeah, so I came on board in June, I believe. Of 2023, and then we opened up to the public in September, and here we are.
That's awesome. All right, so
that was the brief version.
I love that. No, that was great. That was good. That's so a lot to unpack. I mean, film school. What movies were you into? What was like one of your first movies that you really like fell in love with?
This is gonna be kind of like so cliche, but like Fight Club was definitely like one of the
Great. Yeah.
like so as a teenage boy, I was like, oh my god, this is amazing! Look at that,
That was really cool. I mean, spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't seen season 1 of Mr. Robot is like that set the trend for that like final twist. It's not like not quite the Shyamalan twist, where he like you find out they're robots or something like that, but it's always that kind of like they were never really there kind of
exactly
dialogue, So that's cool. I love that. And then I always loved the little novels he would read in the movie where he'd be like, I'm Jane's liver. I give her cancer and she dies or whatever. There's so many little kind of hidden gems in those movies.
No, for sure. And I mean, that led me through the whole rabbit hole of like the writer, right? The original Fight Club is a book. So like, then I went and read, I think like 6 of his books, back to back. But there's a lot of kind of like little quips and dialogues like that and throughout his books that are amazing.
I like that. And do you think that like that had any, maybe I'm skipping so far ahead because I'm trying to just catch up, because it's always so amazing when I sit and talk to people and I get to hear like the beginning of their story. Morgan, I think, framed it well. He said, none of us come to wine as our first choice. Not our first choice, but like maybe our first decision, So it's always interesting to see where people kind of started. Do you think that like those small details and kind of like the small little impacts in that are still things that you kind of like cherish today? Like I think about Holbrook House and you mentioned that it's incredibly beautiful, which it is, and there's a lot of fine small details. Do you think that kind of maybe echoes back to all the kind of fun little hidden gems and all the movies that you loved?
I think so. I mean, I do think because I do really love kind of like little Easter eggs,
Yeah.
And so I do love kind of playing with our guests or like kind of incorporating little things on the beverage list or in service that, are kind of like little details that you might not pick up on, like it might go completely unperceived, but then if you do pick up on it, you're like, oh, that's funny. Or, like that's that's really cool.
Yeah.
And it might be like just a small little thing, but at the end of the day, we all work long hours, right? Like hospitality is one of those things where the hours that you work are definitely a little bit longer than most other industries. So you have to make it fun. You have to be enjoying it. Otherwise you go insane. But,
you'll lose the passion.
Yeah, for sure. The proverbial burnout bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think those little things like, maybe I've never quite thought about it like that, but I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I like that. I always think of it as like an inside joke, right?
Yeah.
For the people that get it, it's like an inside joke. I always like to reference John's menu at Boulevard is, he would carry he would pour like a father and a son by the glass. 2 different wines, 2 different wineries, but both by the glass at the same time is like a little like
wink,
gotcha kind of thing, That's awesome. And then, when you did this study abroad program and you were in Madrid and then France, were you working in restaurants then?
I was. So in Madrid, I actually worked in a Mexican restaurant.
Okay.
And same thing, super casual. But yeah, so my family knows very little about wine, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't really care too much about it. Like they'll enjoy it if it's in front of them for sure. But they don't really. They grew up with beer. They grew up with tequila. They grew up with mezcal, right? So that's kind of their jam. Which I also love. But,
I love those things.
Yeah, but nobody really grew up with wine in my family. It wasn't something that I was really exposed to that much. So when I went to Europe, I think I started off with the calimocho, right? Just like red wine and Coca-Cola, and I was like, oh, this tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
This isn't bad. And then kind of slowly progressed, and I was like, oh, what is this Rioja? What is this thing? And just like kind of slowly started to pick up, a little here, a little there, and then went to France, and my girlfriend's family at that time, they were really into wine, and they were like, oh no, like we must have some cheese and some wine, this is, and I'm like, oh, this is same thing, tastes really great. What is this? And now I think about it, I was a poor college student. I was living in the Rhone Alps area. I was like pretty close to the Savoie and Touillon and Tujura, like, you know, like, so I had all those things at my disposal, and I took advantage of pretty much 0 of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And now I think back and I'm like, man, I was right there.
Yeah.
But, you know, I didn't know. So, so, I mean, it kind of like just it exposed me to wine. It exposed me to that world. But when I went to New York and I was like, I'm going to, you know, make this my profession, I was totally thinking cocktails.
Yeah.
You know, it was 100% like cocktails is the way to go. And 11 Madison Park had an incredible cocktail program. They still do, right? But as that kind of like grew, I was also working on the floor, and we did a lot of wine pairings. And, you know, I still remember not knowing very much about wine. And, you know, in one of the pairings, it was, you know, Muscadet, and I was like, okay, Muscat, got you.
Yeah.
You know, and completely poured it out of sequence, you know, like, you know, the beverage director at the time was like red in the face, like, what are you doing? You're messing up, you know, this beautiful progression.
Oops.
Yeah, you know, it's a learning experience.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you laugh about it, but you know, so I think that my desire to learn more about wine and kind of like really delve into it to a certain degree came from, you know, being a little bit ashamed, I guess, you know, a little bit like felt like out of place, or like I didn't know enough. So, you know, kind of was like a reaction of mine to like, you know, be like, oh no, well, I'm going to learn and, you know, I'm going to show everybody that I do know this.
Yeah.
And then as I started to learn more and more about it, then I just started to really enjoy it. But yeah, no, at the beginning it was kind of more of a self-preservation to a certain degree.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's similar. You know, my path was restaurant management at 18 or 19, and I was responsible for the wine program. I'm like, I don't know anything about wine, you know, and I would have my girlfriend at the time, who was a couple years older than me, like buy wine from the store or whatever, and I would just be like, I guess I should learn about this. And I go like, I don't like Pinot Noir. I'll never like Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
And, you know, now I'm like, well, some of the best wines I've had are Pinot Noirs. And, but I think that's the cool part is that, you know, wine is a journey. And I don't think, to sound total cheeseball, you know, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I don't know that there's ever really a destination with wine. I don't know that we'll ever know everything.
Well, I think the destination always changes and it expands, right?
Yeah.
Like they would say, you know, for the Court of Master Sommeliers, you know, like if you were a master, you know, 20 years ago, like what you were tested on was much smaller than what it is now.
Right.
There's a lot more regions that are now testable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's always producers that are, you know, being found or that are new, that are coming on board. And, you know, so it's always, there's new wine regions that, you know, are getting better and better. So they deserve the attention. So yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of pretty infinite, and then, you know, you have vintage variations, so then it's like, you know, add that on top. So
we know that in Napa.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one of the other things that you mentioned that I don't like, but I can relate to is, and maybe for any of our listeners that aren't in the service industry, this might not resonate as much, but just grabbing a bottle and like going to the table and having that confidence and just like pouring it and being like, I fucking nailed that. And then walking back and you like look at somebody's face and you're like, oh shit, what did I do wrong? You know, I remember my first time working at 8 tables, not my first time, but the first time I ever just like grabbed the bottle and went, I was just like, fuck it, I'm doing it, you know? And I like look and I like poured half the table and I like look up and all the servers are in the wait station looking at me like, don't do that. And I was just like, middle of my spiel. And then I just froze and I'm like, and I just poured everybody and I go like, and this is an extra glass of wine. And I just like walked away because I just thought like, oh, what am I going to do now? Like they're having a good time and I messed up a little bit, but they'll be fine.
But at least you erred on the side of like giving the guest something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's always like, if you're going to make a mistake in a restaurant, always make it, you know, so it's favorable for
in
the
their
guest.
favor. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, they're not going to complain about getting, you know, I mean, maybe depending on the customer, they might complain about getting the same wine twice, but yeah, that's a great point too, because there's been situations that I've watched where like you miss a pairing because you're waiting, you know, and it's like, even if you don't know how to spiel the wine like 100% and you're not going to be able to answer every question.
Yeah.
Like we've been to we've been to restaurants before. We ate at Kiln. It was an incredible experience, and the team was great. And, they sent us, and they know us. Like, it wasn't like we're some bougie, mysterious kind of customer. Like, we're friends, and they would, like, send a couple people our way, and they would come over, and they would just be like, this is Riesling from Mosel. And I'd be like, thanks. And they would, like, walk away, and you'd be like, that probably made them feel so good. It built the confidence little by little, That's what it's about. It's like, if we make it this, like, hugely intimidating thing, it's like, then the first time you go out, you're probably going to fuck up because you're scared. It shouldn't be scary. Like, it should be fun, especially when it comes to, like, pairing. I feel like it should just be like, hey, this is a cool thing, or this is enjoyable, What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that, just overall wine can be intimidating just on a regular, just going to the store and picking a bottle, right? Can be intimidating if you aren't familiar with it, if, it's not something that you do all the time. But then you put that in, a setting where it's like you're paying a lot of money for this tasting menu. And then, there's a guy in a suit that comes in and, seems to know so much about it. Like there's definitely, I've been to my fair share of tasting menus. And when I would first go, I think I would, obviously just be like, very like, oh, yes, you know everything.
Yeah.
Now I have a lot more fun with it. Right now I can kind of, quip with them or like, kind of like talk shop a little bit. But yeah, I think there was definitely some moments where I was like, oh, I don't really like this wine, but I don't want to tell them that. It's like, whereas now I would probably be like, hey, can I get something else that's not really working for me?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think wine should be fun. Wine should definitely, be approachable. And I think for a lot of parts of the world it's something that you grew up with and you have it at your table pretty much every night and it's not abused and it's, thought of as part of the meal. And I think that's great. But here in the US, I do think it's still, the relationship is a little bit different and, price points, et cetera, the knowledge behind it, the labels, all of that contributes for there to be like a little bit of a mystery behind it. And then that itself creates, a little bit of fear for sure.
Yeah. Because you don't know what you're getting. You don't know if it's going to be good or not. It's not like there's somebody in the grocery store that's going to help you understand what each of the wines taste like. And unless you're in a place that's like a mom and pop shop that actually wants shelf talkers, there's not going to be any way to describe the wine. And I think that's why a company like Vivino is so hugely successful, or the brands that have enough money to put the tasting notes on the back of the bottle or whatever. I think it's funny, like you're saying that, I'm thinking about like if you were to get a bottle of Muscadet, you're looking at all these different bottles. They all basically look the same. It's all the same bottle shape. All the labels are just like white. It's not like a hugely, it's a relatively homogenized like branding, right? But it would always be good because it's inexpensive. Yeah. And stylistically, they aim for the same thing. But if you were going to the store and picking up a $50 bottle off the shelf, you'd go like, would I rather get this or would I rather get the larger, more commercial brand that I've heard all my friends talk about? Or would I rather spend less on a lesser quality wine that I know is reliable?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. I think that's, if you compare it to beer, right? Like, you go to the shop, first of all, like the beers kind of tell you what they taste like on the label, more or less. And then your entry level is so much lower. You get 6 of them. If you don't really like them that much, like you only have to drink 1 can, leave the rest in the fridge. Yeah. Like, it's a lot easier for sure. Whereas like, like you said, if you don't know, it's intimidating. You open the bottle, you don't like it. You have a whole bottle that maybe not doesn't go to waste, but like it wasn't what you were expecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're giving it to a friend or you're opening at dinner with a friend or you have somebody over for, a date or something over for dinner and you're opening the bottle for them and it just like doesn't land, you're kind of like, oof, And then also, I think you touched on a great point is like cost of entry on beer is so much less. Or you have something like liquor where the cost of entry is maybe not as low, but it can age forever. You can open it, you can use it for all kinds of different things. And unless you're going to make it with Coca-Cola, like wine kind of loses its purpose after you open it after a couple days, right? Make sangria and stuff, but
yeah. I mean, I do encourage anybody that doesn't like their red wine to just put some Coca-Cola in it.
Yeah, why not?
Great.
I mean, hey, especially if it's been open for a couple days, right?
For sure.
Yeah, because that's where the whole thing kind of started from, right?
Yeah.
It was like wine was kind of old, not so good, and they're like, let's spice it up with some Coca-Cola.
Yeah, let's just add some more sugar to it and
Like-
carbonation. It'll be great.
So one of the other things along your journey was coming to New York, working at 11 Madison Park. I mean, I think that, for people that are listening that don't understand, this restaurant is arguably has been named like best restaurant in the world.
Yeah, so it's been, so there's, the world's 50 best, which is, this voting guide, I guess, that every year names, the world's 50 best restaurants. And, it carries a lot of weight with it. There's also like Michelin, and like getting three Michelin stars. So yeah, so 11 Madison Park is a restaurant that achieved that, right? They got 3 Michelin stars. They were named the #1 restaurant in the world. And, has now become, pretty much an institution more than it already was. And has turned vegan now, which is pretty interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now they're a vegan 3 Michelin star restaurant.
Cool.
So,
Are all their cocktails vegan too?
Yes. Yeah.
What about their wine?
I think so. Actually, I don't know if they've. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. But yeah. So I, like I said, I was looking for like the best place I could go to.
Yeah.
And like I said, at the time I knew a little bit about restaurants and and about kind of the hierarchy of restaurants in New York City, but I'd only been in New York City for I think a year and a half at that point. So it was just more of like the fact that I was like, oh, this restaurant is 3 Michelin stars, And before I went to the interview, I did a little Google search and I was like, oh, okay, like there's this guy called Danny Meyer that owns it but just sold it. He just sold it to this other guy, Will and Daniel, so it's like kind of had a little bit of an idea of what was going on, but I think the reality of like afterwards when I like was fully in there, it's basically like Ivy League, right? It's like a finishing school. It's where you really hone in. They have, because they do tasting menus at such a high level, and the prices are very high for the tasting menu because you get these beautiful presentations and food and service. They really hone in on every single step along the way. So when I said I started as a kitchen server, it was like literally just trying to perfect carrying a plate to a table and putting it down,
spieling it right.
And doing it, with when it was a 6-top, everybody putting it down, at the same time.
Swan,
and and walking around and kind of, the analogy of ballerinas came up a lot, or swans, or like all those things. So it's like that was the very first step. Once you like were good at that, then you can move on to pouring water and, and putting silverware down.
Yep.
And then you got really good at that, and then you can now you can put the orders into the computer system. And make sure that all the allergies are noted and preferences, and then you can pour the wine for the pairings. And put the glassware. It's like all these steps until finally you're the one that's leading the experience for the table and kind of guiding them through everything.
Yeah.
But so it's like I said, it was definitely an education that I was paid for to a certain degree. So they paid me to learn all those things and to really kind of hone in on it. And that's been pretty invaluable, I would say. Like it really changed my trajectory as far as where I am now. And it gave me the tools that I still use to this day, to a large degree. There's, obviously no place can give you everything.
Right.
But it definitely gave me a very good foundation.
Yeah, certainly. I can't imagine it wouldn't. High pressure situation to say the least. I mean, every day. Yeah. Most of the time, any 3 stars like that, it's like, right. The pot is boiling and it's right about to boil over, but it never does. You know.
Have you seen The Bear?
Yeah.
A bit more. No, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, but it's a high pressure situation because everybody cares so much. Right. So everybody wants everything to be great. And, the people that come in to dine, a lot of times they might only go to that restaurant once in their life.
Yeah, for sure.
So and they're spending a lot of money to go to that restaurant. So their expectations are very high, and it could be something monumental for them. That they'll talk about for the rest of their life. So you definitely don't want to make any mistakes. You want everyone to have the best experience possible. And I think that's why it's such, there's so much pressure around it, because that's what's going on. And you feel that pressure for sure.
I mean, for most people, you're right. It's like a once in a lifetime experience, so you want to make sure you knock it out of the park. And those little details really matter. I mean, my dad, I remember when I was a kid, we didn't go out to eat a lot. We were, lower middle class. And when we would go out to eat, it was little things that could make or break an experience for him, and the most simple one was always, if the salad came out on a hot plate, he would just be like, I don't ever want to come back here again. He would eat it. He would pay, right? But he would go like, I'm never going to go back there again. Or if the salad came out on a cold plate, like out of the fridge, he would be even more over the moon. And I remember my first decision I ever made as like, I was never general manager, but I was like director of front of house operation or whatever.
Nice title. I like that.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Whatever. They just didn't want to pay me for a GM position, which is fine. I was 19. I didn't deserve it probably anyways. But one of the first things that I did was enact something that he had once and would not stop talking about, and it was cold salad forks. So when they would bring the salad out, you'd put the fork on the plate. It wasn't a fancy place where the fork's out first, but we were serving pasta and pizza and soda out of plastic cups. So we would always have salad forks in the reach-in. So you would just put your salad forks on the plate and it would come out cold. And I remember the first time he came to eat there, flew from California to Texas, and he was eating there and he was just like, oh, you did this? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, this is so cool. They'd always call me Bubba. This is so cool, Bubba.
But that feels great, right? Like that moment of like, especially like your dad, like being like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's such a little thing, right?
It was great.
But you must have felt like, hell yeah. Like,
yeah, I nailed it. Yeah. I was like, this is it. I'm riding off into the sunset. It's not going to get better from here. Yeah, I think like the little things are always super important, and they mean a lot. And I think that's sometimes what can be the most impactful. How did you like all the different positions that you worked? Did you like captain more? Did you feel like it resonated with your director mentality?
On my, like, I'm going to say like exit interview,
sure,
to be nice to myself. On my exit interview, I was talking to the manager, and I did tell him, I'm like, hey, I think not everybody will excel at every position, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that doesn't mean that it's like you might be a really good captain, but not necessarily like the position that was behind that was like server, right?
Yeah.
So you might not be like a great server, but you'll be an incredible captain. Like I don't think it always worked like, like, oh, you ace every single position. But I do think they're necessary. I do think you needed to go through that succession. And like I said, it really made you kind of hone in on the very specifics of each position, which, in the long run gave you like, more tools in your arsenal, and definitely like made you understand what was going on in the dining room a lot better, right?
Yeah.
Because you had done everything else. So you knew, what your buzzer was going through. You knew that he was running around searching for demi-tasse spoons because nobody, if somehow they always disappear.
Yeah.
Because
people like to bend them and turn them into tie clips. That's what we used to always do.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was you.
That was me. I have a couple tweezers too. A couple sets of tweezers.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of those funny things. There's like, for whatever reason, there's always something that's scarce in any restaurant, and it varies. Sometimes it might be like a demi-tasse spoon. Sometimes it might be a steak knife, or a certain size plate or whatever.
Yeah. A jus pour was the one that I have the most nightmares about.
Yeah. But it got to the point with the demi-tasse spoons that I would come in, and the first thing I would do is that I would put like 5 extra ones in my pocket.
Hoard them, yeah.
And use them at the very last, like last minute that I could not find any. I was like, okay, I got these.
Yeah, that's so funny. And that's what you have to do sometimes. You gotta. It's called mise en place. You gotta have everything in place.
Yeah, that's my personal mise en place.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, That's my one little secret that everybody knows.
That's perfect. Good. Yeah. So throughout your journey from Mexico abroad, back to Mexico, to and forth, and working at these different Mexican restaurants in different countries, have you come across any wine programs that focus on Mexican wine, or are there any, like, have you found yourself gravitating towards any Mexican wines recently? Because I feel like our exposure here has been a lot greater recently, but I'd be interested to see what Madrid and New York look like.
Yeah, well, Madrid had like 0 Mexican wines.
Right.
Like it was all Spanish.
Probably
right?
not a lot of exportation going on either. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the wine industry in Mexico is, evolving and getting bigger and more diverse for sure. But yeah, I mean, what is it now? Like 15 years ago, it wasn't like it was known in Mexico. It was probably known, I imagine, in, Southern California.
Yeah.
But outside of those areas, it wasn't very well known.
Right.
Even today, I haven't found many, restaurants that can focus solely on Mexican wine.
Yeah.
But there are some great producers, and there's some really fun ones that are coming out. And, like Beachy, I think, is a really great example.
That's a big one. Their wines have gotten a lot more consistent in character over the last few years, too.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So but they start off like just the fact that, like this kind of like more, low intervention model kind of came out of Mexico is pretty surprising because before that you had these like, big, very ripe, kind of imitation of California wines in Baja. And now there's more and more diversity. But, first winery in the Americas was in Mexico.
Yeah. Casa Madera.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to sell that in Texas 10 years ago.
So, there is a long history of winemaking, but it's, tied to the Spanish conquistadors and kind of like that whole, suite of things. So it's always kind of been there, but, definitely beer, spirits have overtaken, are the dominant force in Mexico for sure.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Yeah, one of the places that I really like here in San Francisco, which I think they've changed it recently, but Cotogna Mercado. Have you ever been there?
I have not, no.
Super cool shop. I mean, he has, I think, 120 different agaves on the shelf. He has a bunch of private labels like Cinco Sentidos and Net to do private labels for him. But he has a ton of different agave, and they make a bunch of great sandwiches and cheeses. They make tacos and stuff. But he has a very small wine section, and he only carries, I'm pretty sure at the time it was only Mexican wine.
Yeah.
And he had like 20 different brands or something. And I didn't grab any off there. I go for mezcal more than anything. And I've only been a handful of times because the cost of entry for a lot of mezcals is pretty high.
Yeah, it's skyrocketed too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's probably like one of the things that I'm the most concerned about moving forward. It's like, I know there's like a lot of doomsaying right now, from the traditional wine industry being scared of the natural wine industry, or, the non-drinking community not contributing to the wine consumption side of things. But I think that, like, aside from all of that, the thing I'm the most concerned about is the future well-being of the agave industry, right? It's one of the only products that we work with on a regular basis that takes 7 years to mature on the low end, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even in the sense of beef, growing full cattle doesn't take 7 years. There's not really anything that we deal with on a regular basis that takes so long.
Well, I think that's, I agree. I think that is a major obstacle already. And that's why prices like skyrocket, right? And then a lot of these types of agave you can't even really cultivate. You have to find them like growing wild, right? So you kind of have to search for them, and they haven't found the way to like, propagate them, intentionally. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, for the agave, spirits in general, I always think about it. I'm like, beer, wine, most other spirits, it's, plants that grow back pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
So you can cultivate them every year, or like maybe even twice a year, depending. And like you said, when you take an agave plant, you're killing the whole plant.
Yeah.
Like it's you're taking everything, right? So it's like this plant that's giving its life to become the spirit.
Yeah.
And it's, it's not going to grow back. It's like literally, it's going to be a different plant that needs to grow and get to maturity before it can be used. So yeah, I mean, the most expensive, mezcals are crazy expensive because sometimes it's something that took 20 years to grow. So
yeah, and one of the things that was shocking to me is I was talking to one of our producers, Jason Cox. Well, like I said earlier, he's a little bit more of kind of like, I don't even like to use the term negociant, but kind of like negociant for these farmers. And he was out and I was talking to him, and he uses a lot of Capone product. And I was asking him, well, Capone means that like when it flowers, they cut it off, right? And he goes, yeah. And I go, okay, so like it flowers, you cut it off, it concentrates the sugar. And I go, what happens if you don't cut it off? And he's like, then it's gone. And I go, and how long does it take to come back? He goes, it doesn't. So we're also, not only are we talking about a product that you have to kill in its entirety every 7 years to harvest it, but we're talking about a plant that only flowers once in its life.
Yeah.
Which is pretty terrifying. Like, I mean, for me, again, to just think about, like, I know there's a lot of places, Cinco Sentidos does it, Neta does it. They have like these great little nurseries where they're working on propagating different plants. But a lot of these farmers are really protective. And, Jason and Nikki Nakazawa is the person that we deal with from Neta, work with the farmers, and the farmers will go out and harvest things in the wild, and they just leave the seeds there. They'll leave them, and then they'll come back in another 20 years, or they'll mark something on their map for their kids to go find it later or something. It's just like, thankfully, there's a lot of mountainous areas in Mexico that still aren't developed, that we still have some time, at least for a lot of these more wild varieties. But yeah, I think like when you see pictures of all the monocropping that's going on over there, it's just like,
well, espadín is the easiest one to grow, right? So that's why it's the most prevalent. It's like the fastest growing as well. But yeah, I mean, if you think about tequila, right? So they monocultured, basically. They went to blue agave and the whole region, or different regions that just have that. And there's, that's why there's initiatives like the BAT program to like help pollinate and help like diversify the agaves, because they're worried that, just as with grapes and wine, that if a disease comes along that latches on, it's gonna like decimate everything.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's not something I think about. I mean, I was just thinking about like all the other plants and all the animals that are getting displaced by it. But yeah, I mean, you're right too. At least there's a financial incentive, because with some of these larger companies, we probably couldn't rely on them to do the right thing. It's more, they're like, oh, we don't want to lose our ass. Like, what do we do? Like, well, let's focus on taking care of the earth. It's 15 years too late, dickheads. Sorry. But yeah, anyways. So not a lot of focus on Mexican wine at any of the programs. And you had mentioned going to EMP and kind of focusing more on like the beverage side of things.
Well, that was my passion, right? So I did, like I said, I kind of like worked my way up and did, regular front of house service, you know. They had a whole, SOM team, I think, man, when I was there, it was probably like 7 or 8 of them, so it's a big beverage team. And then they had, another 5 bartenders.
It's a big restaurant too, right?
It's fairly large. Yeah. It's very large. I mean, it's obviously, very spaced out, and it's very comfortable, but it is like a pretty large space. But they had a big beverage team, and I was lucky enough that, like I said, I decided that I was gonna, learn about wine, and for me that meant going to the Court of Master Sommeliers and trying to, pass my exams. And I was very lucky because the SOM team there was kind of like my first, guiding hand. There was a lot of education that, went into the space just naturally. And, during every lineup, there was education. We had classes on Saturdays that we could attend, or, like extras. And, there was always kind of like people that were studying themselves that, kind of felt like if they taught somebody else, and that might like help them study. So it was kind of like always, very reciprocal. But yeah, so I was very lucky that, those were some of the first people that I got to, blind taste with, and they were like, this is what the grid is, according to the Court of Master Sommeliers, and this is what we look for, and this is, a classic example. And,
Yeah.
and so I was very lucky to have access to that. And that really, kind of propelled me. And then once I started to get into my SOM certifications, then my focus kind of slowly left cocktails and then turned more into wine, right? And it's kind of funny because I went to Maison Premier, which is, a cocktail bar, and, won James Beard 4 cocktails while I was there. And, I was managing there, and I was like the wine guy, the wine guy at the cocktail bar.
Yeah,
Like the owner, there was, there's 2 owners, and one of them was focused on kind of everything that, like the aesthetics and the decor and, the uniforms and kind of like all making everything like really beautiful. And the other one was very focused on the product. So at that time, they still have a crazy oyster list. They have like 30 something oysters a day.
Jesus.
Yeah. So like, and every day they would rotate and every day it'd be different and you'd have to reprint the menu. And then he was also, I was very lucky because he was very much into wine. And, he was friends with like Dressner, like Louis Dressner and, Seth Rabin and like, so it's like people that he was very buddies with. So we got access to kind of like the first wave of things that they were bringing in.
Yeah.
So it's like, so it was like this beautiful cocktail program, but then there was like this really great wine list. So you would have like, geeky wine guys come in searching for like certain things, I still remember when we had Overnois pretty like regularly on our list, you know, and not too expensive. Things like that, and then there was the other side of like the beautiful and crazy cocktails,
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably the guy that goes to the cocktail bars and looks at the wine list and the beer list. I've had a lot of great cocktails in my life, and I will still order a cocktail from time to time. I'm not sure that I understand them enough. I mean, I guess that's not true. If I have like a really, really great cocktail, I'm obviously going to be blown away by it. Or if I went to probably a place like that, or, there's this great cocktail bar in Houston called Anvil. It's been there forever.
Oh, I know. I've been there.
Yeah. And then Julep was another good one that was there. They opened, I haven't been there in 7 years. Julep opened maybe like 10 years ago or something. That was a great place. And then there was DTO in Galveston that opened a couple years before I left. So maybe 2014, 2015. And those were like the big cocktail bars in the area. And obviously when you'd go, you'd order a cocktail. But I feel like nowadays when I come to San Francisco, when we go out, I'm like, I don't know if I can afford a cocktail. Some of these $22 cocktails, and, there's a place that'll remain nameless that has a $50 cocktail in their program. And understandably, they're using like older spirits, vintage spirits. So like that's kind of cool. And even when I started at Ozumo, there was like I think there was like an $89 cocktail on the menu or something. It was like Glenfiddich Grand Cru. It had like gold leaf. And first thing I did was like look at the cost of sale on it. And I was like, fuck this. We're not doing this anymore. It was like, cost us $40 to make and we're selling it for $98 or whatever. I'm like, this is dumb. But that's one of the things that I always appreciate. And one of the things I think that I always have like the biggest gripe with is like when you go to a place and there's such this like massive attention to detail when it comes to like one aspect of the beverage program, You go to a great cocktail bar and then they have like really cool beers and they have like grocery store wine. It's kind of like, one of the things that I can appreciate about, Cotogna, the rooftop bar in Dogpatch, Mission Bay, I guess. They focus on Central and Southern American ingredients and beverages. And, do they carry a couple vodkas? Yeah. But, like, that's not what they focus on. Their mezcal selection's great. Their tequila selection's great. But then, their beer selection's cool, too. They have that, I don't know if you've seen it. It's like a tepache cider. It's like fermented pineapple cider or whatever. And those are good. They're in like 500 ml bottles. And then, and their wine program, which is a little harder, obviously, like we touched on earlier, it's just not a lot of Mexican wine being imported. And if you wanted to put together a list that was focused on Mexican wine, you'd have to deal with like 30 distributors for 20 wines, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So they focus on like, local producers that are making, like minimal intervention wines and stuff. So, but the point is that every aspect of the program has some intention behind it, you know? So that's something that I've always loved and appreciated about that. And some of the things that I've liked the least about other places. It's just like, you take so much pride in your cocktail program, but like everything else falls to the wayside. It's kind of like, well, I'll just go somewhere else where I can have the best of all the worlds, you know?
Yeah. But I feel like that's harder and harder to find, you know?
Yeah.
Like, because I do think, you know, in a good and bad way, there's, you know, like very intense focus on one region or, you know, one style or, you know, whatever it might be. But you're right. It's like, I do see that a lot where it's, you know, all about one aspect, all about the wine or the beer or the spirits, you know, like, and they tend to forget the other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I try to take a more holistic approach. Like, I try to divvy my attention as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm responsible for the whole beverage program. So that includes, you know, the spirit selection and the cocktails and the wine and the beer. So like, you know, it can.
And the NA beverages.
And the NA beverages.
Right.
And, you know, there's definitely, as, you know, we're getting to the year mark, you know, I've thankfully gotten more help from, you know, my team and been like, okay, like, hey, you really love this aspect. Like, why don't you, you know, spearhead it and we can kind of work together on this, which, you know, I think is great. And is an opportunity for everybody. But yeah, I try to be a little bit more broad. I do think, you know, the single focus is great. And I think, you know, being specialized is great. And it definitely gives you depth in that field and you have a very unique point of view.
Yeah.
But for Holbrook House, I think, you know, we want to be kind of a place where anybody can walk into.
Yeah.
And like, yes, the you know, the restaurant itself it looks very luxurious. You know, it's very comfortable. It looks very grand, but we kind of always talk about making sure that there's, you know, like we say, you know, we have caviar, but we have French fries. You know, you know, we have champagne, but we have a 24-ounce Modelo. You know, like, so, you know, we kind of want to play with all the worlds as much as we can.
Yeah.
And hopefully, you know, not let too much fall by the wayside, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you guys are in a really great location too, right? Like you have this amazing office structure above you, but you're also located in downtown San Francisco. And your hours are crazy, right? Is it still 6 a.m. to midnight?
It's 7:30 to midnight.
Oh, I see you guys are getting lazy. I see now.
Yeah, you know, it's I'm sorry you wanted to come at 6.
No, that's okay. So I also think that's important too, because like you're able to capture like a lot of different people in a lot of different points in their day, right? Like if you have somebody coming in from overseas or whatever, and they're landing and they're jet lagged, I mean, they can come in and they can get a beverage, you know, like there's not a lot of places like that anymore. You know, restaurants are opening at 11 or noon or not at all. You know, bars aren't opening till noon. Not that people need to be drinking at 7:30 a.m., but the point is if they want to, they can.
Yeah. I mean, well, we also have a great coffee program. You know, that's like another part too. Like, you know.
Oh my God, your guys' coffee machine in the corner?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that? Can you tell me? It's supposed to be like the shit, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an Italian coffee machine. It's called an Electra.
Okay.
You know, it's a very good coffee machine. You know, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. You know, it's like very unique. I don't think I've personally ever seen one like that here in the U.S. So, you know, it is definitely like a centerpiece for, you know, I mean, our bar is, you know, this huge oval in the center of the room that takes up, you know, most of the real estate inside.
Yeah, 50%.
Yeah. So, you know, so the bar is a very big piece of it. And then one whole corner of that bar is our coffee station, right? So, yeah, so that machine really anchors kind of that coffee station. And, you know, we have some great baristas, and, you know, our lead barista, you know, kind of really likes to delve into it, and we have some very nice coffee coming from Sight Glass, some very nice beans, and I mean, we try the same thing. We try to do everything right. You know, it's like we do the little minutia that the high-end coffee places do because we care. Yeah. So same thing. It's, you know, and our tea, you know, comes from Song Teas, and so, you know, high quality tea, and it's like all these little things that we kind of like always want to take care of, and as long as you have the person that's inspired by it, then I think, you know, it allows you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's reminds me of this video I watched on Instagram, and I'm totally spacing on the guy's name, but a famous restaurant personality from New York or something, and he was talking about like how dining out is one of the most affordable luxuries there is, right?
Yeah.
Because you're able to employ 30 people for the cost of $80 an hour if you go out to a nice meal, right? You go out to a nice meal, it's you and your wife, you have a glass of wine each, you have an app, you have 2 entrees, $160, $200. It's $100 an hour, and you get access to all of these people working for you for this one experience, not to mention all the prep cooks and everything. But I think that also, you know, what you're saying is also the other point is there's so much intention that goes into these things, and there's so much kind of time and thought behind it. It's not just like, yeah, we'll serve coffee. Who gives a shit? Buy it from the store, or Folgers, or who's got the cheapest
order from
stuff.
your mass distributor.
Yeah. And Sightglass is a local coffee roaster. They do an awesome job. And then all your pastries that you guys order are local.
Yeah,
baker,
so we use Craftsman Wolves, which is a local bakery, and they you know, they're very playful with their pastries, which I really like. You know, talking about kind of like those little details. Like, you know, there's a pastry that comes with like a little tiny like plastic ampule like of colored sugar to like sprinkle on top. You know, it's like those little things, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so we use them. We bake some of our stuff in house, you know, but to a smaller degree. Like you know, anything that like takes, you know, sheeted dough is we buy.
Yeah,
sure.
Like the financiers and stuff.
Financiers, like, you know, the croissants and the
that makes
coups
sense.
and all that stuff. You know, all the stuff that's like a lot more intricate.
Yeah.
Like we just know that we don't have the equipment or the bandwidth to like really do it.
Right.
You know, so we know that we can partner with somebody that's really great and provide that as well.
In Craftsman and Wolves, they have this one. I stopped by the Southern shop or whatever for it, and they had this like cake that was made out of croissants, and I was like, what the fuck? This is a Frankenstein thing, you know? And I looked at it and it looked really, really good, right? But it was just like a loaf made of chopped up pieces of croissant. You could see all the layers and everything. And I was just like, oh, it's really cool, but you know, I wanted to get it, but I was on a work with, so I didn't. I refrained because I didn't want this guy to watch me shove a small loaf of croissant cake into my face.
Should have done it.
I know I should have, but now
he would have probably partaken.
Hindsight's 2020. We could have shared it. Yeah.
But no, like even like they do this. They call it the Rebel Within, which looks like a muffin.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you cut it, and there's a whole egg inside.
Yeah, like a soft-boiled egg, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen that.
You know, so it's like stuff like that we enjoy, that we think is cool and
that's awesome. You know? Yeah, and then one of the things that I love a lot about your guys' place, that the second I saw it before you opened, when you and I first met, you showed it to me, I was like, holy shit, this is gonna be the coolest thing. You guys have these switches on the wall, right? One for martini cart, one for champagne cart.
Yeah, so that's been kind of our Instagram calling card, right?
Yeah,
like that's kind of what has blown up, and you know, I think a lot of people know us for that. So yeah, we have these banquettes, and you know, they have two little switches on the wall, and one of them says champagne, one of them says martini, and you know, depending on which one you flip, we have a cart that comes by. So you know, we have those two things are our focus for beverage. You know, so we do focus heavily on martinis and variations of martinis and things like that, and then we focus heavily on champagne on the wine side, right? So we have a pretty heavy champagne list. But yeah, we just wanted to do the same thing, something fun, interactive, that, you know, is a little different. And, you know, like, we have no problem in saying that we were inspired by other people that have done carts, right? Mm-hmm. Like the Connaught Hotel in London famously has a martini cart. Mm-hmm. Our martini cart is, you know, like at least the physical martini cart is very much inspired by that. Mm-hmm. But then what we do with it is, you know, it's pretty different.
Yeah.
The owner, you know, his name is Phil Spiegel. He just recently went to London, because he was the one that kind of came up with that idea, and he was inspired by videos that he saw from the Connaught, so he finally went to visit it.
Oh, that's awesome.
In person, and you know, he had a great time and everything was great, but he was like, yeah, they don't, like, you know, like we carry the you know, small selection of gins and vermouths and vodkas in the cart, and they don't, right? They like ask you before they get there, which one do you want? Pick off the list, right? And he's like, so like there's like small things that, you know, we do differently and kind of have kind of evolved into, and it's always kind of fun to see like how something that inspires you, you take it somewhere else and it transforms and it becomes something else.
Yeah. Put your fingerprint on it,
For sure.
All right. Well, that was a sponsored ad from Holbrook House.
I know.
Sorry. No. Okay. So, I mean, to circle back to when you first got to San Francisco, you were working at Cotogna. This is post-pandemic.
Yeah.
Huge parklet. Were they still doing like the sidewalk fair and stuff then?
When I got there, they did it like once, I think.
I see.
And then they did like a yearly one.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it was like around Mother's Day, something like that.
Yeah. I think that's.
But they didn't have. I think during the pandemic, from what I know, they had like this big kind of like market that they would do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like kind of on the tail end when I got there.
I see.
But the parklet expanded when I was there, and I mean that's. It's an incredible restaurant, and like the food quality is amazing, and like it's an institution for sure. And during the pandemic, they had a parklet because nobody could be inside. But then after the pandemic, they still had a parklet, and all of a sudden their dining room is twice as big.
Yeah.
So the kitchen was definitely like always like just. It's a very busy place, and then you double it in size and like
double it in size and try to maintain the same quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was definitely, I got my steps in for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Like walking up and down that parklet was and it's at like a very slight incline, but after a while, man, it gets to that little incline.
Oh yeah. Well, especially around the corner where that slightly steeper hill is, right?
Yeah.
And did you move? So you moved here. You were with your fiance. And was Cotogna like one of the first places that you looked at?
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy. I guess I've always kind of just moved and never planned too much, I guess. But so when we were in South Carolina, we were kind of talking about different opportunities, and I was always an advocate to like let's go to New York. You haven't lived there, all my friends are there. Like let's go back there. But I actually had a headhunter reach out and was like, hey, there's they're looking for a different fine dining restaurant. They're looking for a director of operations. Are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, well, it's a pretty famous restaurant. Like, yeah, it'd be cool to talk to you.
Yeah.
Talk to them. It ended up not working out. But when that happened, my fiance, girlfriend at the time was like, well, I have to look for something. So she, sent out a couple resumes and didn't hear back either. So we were both kind of like, oh, well, didn't think too much of it. You were like, oh, it didn't happen. Like, that's kind of it. And then a month later, she gets called back, right? And she's like, oh, we want to continue this interview process with you. So she said, sure. Ended up getting the job. And, they were like, we want you here in a month. So she said, yep. And neither of us had ever been to San Francisco. so she accepted the job, and we decided to move without us having even like stepped foot in the city. So we came for like, I think it was like a 4 or 5 day period to find an apartment and for me to like stage at like 4 different places.
Yeah.
So within those 4 days, I think I did like 4 stages and we found an apartment and at the end of the day I decided to go with Cotogna. So I reached out to them and saw kind of what they had available and then they kind of reached back out. But it was definitely on the top of my list for sure.
Yeah. I can't wait. They're supposed to be opening Verjus soon. I mean, that's what I keep hearing. It's always been soon. But I remember in my time at Quince, I one time worked an event at Verjus, and Johnny Ives from Apple was doing like a buyout thing there.
He's always doing a buyout thing.
Yeah, of course. And they fed us, and it was just like, they just gave us a bunch of just like sausages on a plate. And I just ate it, and I was like, oh, fuck, this is so good. I can't believe this is so good. And I go like, what's this made from? And they go, oh, Don Watson lamb, right? So like they were sourcing Don Watson lamb for like the main protein for the Quince menu. Then they were taking the secondary cuts and using it for Cotogna, and then they were taking everything else and turning it into sausage at Verjus. And I thought that was great. It was very holistic, very like full use kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think they're really great at that. They're really great at the relationships that they have, with the different purveyors. Mm-hmm. Like they're very, very intentional with it. And they do kind of try to use everything that they can, right? And that was really cool to see.
Yeah.
And it's, at the end of the day, it's like pasta, right? That's like the main thing, you know, and it's, it's just, I think that's one of the great things about San Francisco. The Italian cuisine here is, out of this world. It's really great. And then the depth that there is of Italian cuisine is very impressive.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love about living in the city too. Is just there's like a big range. You can go to La Chicha just down here at the end of Church Street, and people are going to be able to figure out where I live. And you can get like Southern Italian food, or A16, and you can get Southern Italian food. Or you can go to like Montesacro and get more like Roman style cuisine, and you can kind of like bounce around. Similarly, with Chinese restaurants, it's why I have always liked China Live is like you go to Chinatown and there's like, if you want barbecue, there's a shop for barbecue. If you want dim sum, there's a shop for dim sum. If you want noodles, shop for noodles, right? But you can go to China Live and you could order
Get it all.
everything, right? It's a one-stop shop.
And then go upstairs, go to cold drinks.
Yeah, the great cocktails, yeah. And then the process of kind of moving from Cotogna and going to Holbrook House, what did that look like? I mean, you saw the space, you did the interviews, and you mentioned all these like really cool things. Were all of these things already kind of like thought out by the time you started there? Or
I would say there was like the structure, right? Like the bones were there for sure. Yeah. They had already decided there was going to be a martini light and a champagne light.
Yep.
But no idea what was going to go in the cart or how that would work, right?
Yeah. How to execute it. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only the execution, but like, it's like the concept is that we'll have these two things, like what that will actually look like, like what, up in the air.
Yeah.
And then same thing with, like the service, like everything was kind of like the main structure was there, but I got there, I think, at a really great time because I was able to kind of take it from the point of like, okay, you have the main ideas.
Yeah.
How do we hone it in and what are the details? How is this actually going to work? And I got to like have say in kind of like some final decisions for like serviceware and things like that, and which was great because then it kind of can tie really well into whatever, we're doing now.
Right. Yeah.
So I was very lucky that I got there at a pretty great time. And yeah, I mean, that was actually like through an ex-server from Cotogna.
Wow.
So that was like the connection. So I was kind of like that, I'd only been in San Francisco for a year and like that, made that connection and made that friendship. And then they kind of introduced me to Phil, and then Phil was like, yeah, let's talk, and kind of went from there.
That's awesome. And as somebody that works as much as you do, what's something that you do on a regular basis to kind of like recharge your battery?
Yes, I think, it really varies. But I think people recharge their batteries in different ways.
Yeah.
Some people like to go on hikes and, like that. I, sometimes might just order really shitty takeout and watch a movie.
Yeah.
Like, and don't get me wrong, like I like to do the hiking part and stuff like that as well from time to time. But I think if I'm really like exhausted and, just want to like kind of have some time to myself, like I'll probably do that.
Yeah. It's nice. I mean, we give so much of ourselves to the job, and we give so much energy, and we give so much like happiness. You know what I mean? That sometimes like when you're at home, all you need to do is just like shut off, right? It's just like order in, watch a movie, veg out. That's great.
It's kind of like the, meditation to a certain degree because you're not really thinking. You're just kind of like focusing on like whatever's in front of you.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, other than that, I'm sure as you do as well, like restaurants and food are my career, but they're also my main form of entertainment and what I spend the most money on and time on. So yeah, it's always a lot of fun to go out and see what everybody else is doing and, kind of like what the city and the whole Bay Area has to offer is always really cool. And you get inspiration from that, or at least I get inspiration from seeing what other people do. And there's a little sense of competition in me where it's like, fuck, their martini's better than mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to correct that.
Yeah.
Yeah, things like that. But yeah, that's kind of like the two main things that I would say I would do. I would either go out and go eat somewhere or like just veg out for a little bit.
And what's one of the best meals you've had in San Francisco since you've been here? Not to put anybody else down, but
Yeah. That's a really hard one. I've had some really great meals. Recently went to San Juan.
I've heard good things.
I went there for my birthday dinner, and that was really great. That was exceptional. And it's Korean barbecue.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that they didn't have the grills at the center of the table. That's kind of what I was expecting.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Because most Korean barbecues, you're kind of like,
Right.
that's one of the main things. You're like, oh, it's right.
It's like hot pot. It's like just there.
Yeah. And they don't, right? They do everything in the kitchen. They bring it out, and it is so much better.
Yeah.
With people that know what they're doing,
Right.
taking care of it.
That's so funny. Yeah.
But no, it was just like it has such a depth of flavor, and it's playful, and the service was good.
When it's cooked like it's supposed to be too.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was a really great experience. Ernest in the Mission has also was a really great experience as well. Like, I think that was just the way that they mix influences and come up with these crazy dishes is really cool. Cotogna, I think, is always going to be up there.
Yeah.
Just like incredibly tasty and solid and comforting. It's like very warm. There's always like a warmth when you go there.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many places. But I think those three right now stand out to me for sure.
Yeah. And let's see, I had another question that I was mulling around, but I guess one of the questions that I wanted to, before we get to the end, I want to circle back to your time in film or your film career. What is a movie that you're super into right now? Any recent movie that you've seen that you've just been like, damn, it's been a while since I've seen a movie that good?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say like, oh my God, it's like the best movie I've seen, but
Sure.
one that kind of had me thinking a lot was Civil War.
Oh, I haven't seen it. I want to see it.
Yeah. And that one was just, I think, it's kind of, it just made me think it's about a war photographer, right?
Right.
And it made me like think about like, oh man, they're like right there. They're like about to get killed all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And then it ties into, kind of like the political situation or possible, very bad, things that could happen if this country gets to a certain point, right? So those two things. It's definitely not a happy movie.
Right.
It's like a very
Right.
very intense and not happy movie, but it definitely got me thinking, and I've kind of thought about it in and out like recently. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I really want to go see the new Deadpool movie, but I haven't gotten a chance to.
I want to go see it too. I remember the question. So the other question that I was going to ask is, as somebody that's as a student of film and also a student of the restaurant industry, how do you feel about? We'll touch on a few different. The Bear is coming. Anybody that's listening right now automatically knows I'm going to ask about the Bear. Have you had a chance to watch Waiting?
Yeah, a while ago, but yeah.
And have you had a chance to watch Slam and Salmon?
I have not, actually.
It's a little under the radar. It's a Broken Lizard group. The guy that made Super Troopers, or the guys that make Super Troopers, did it. It's pretty funny. It's pretty absurd.
Yeah.
But I guess, like, how do you feel about kind of like restaurant movies? I feel like it's something I wish I saw a lot more of, but...
Yeah, I think it's, there's such a... The restaurant industry is huge, right?
Yeah.
It's such a big part of the economy and, like, the workforce and, like... all of our social structure, really, like if you really think about it, restaurants play such an integral part in kind of like our society, that I would definitely like to see it represented a little bit more. I do think that, like Waiting is a really great example, right? It's like poignant, but it was funny and kind of silly, and I think that's what, that's how most people portrayed restaurants.
Right.
That was kind of like the extent.
Yeah.
And then you started to get kind of more serious. And, the Bear being kind of like the most recent and obvious example of like, oh, well, there's actually like a lot of pressure and drama and a lot of like, mental health issues and
Yep.
all this other side that is kind of now being talked about a little bit more. The menu
The menu.
being satirical. But I mean, I think the menu.
But kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was like I always tell friends this, but like there's a point where they first get to the island, and they're getting the tour, and like the woman shows them their like barracks or lockers or whatever,
Yeah.
and she goes, "And this is where we live." And everybody
Yeah.
laughs, and she's like, "Why are you laughing?" Kind of
Yeah,
like, why?
Yeah.
Why? That wasn't a joke.
Yeah. It's actually where we live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of like little things like that. There's actually a show. I think it's over, but it's Sweet Bitter,
Oh.
which is based on a book by this woman that worked at Gramercy Tavern in New York City.
Oh, cool.
And it shows you, I think, the other side, which is a lot of these shows are based on the kitchen,
Right.
and the chef, right?
Yeah.
Which is understandable. Like I think there's a lot more drama there, and there's knives
Sure.
and fire, and
Yeah, yeah.
like all that stuff. But you kind of rarely see the opposite side of like the service side of it, and Sweet Bitter was kind of that part, and kind of like her going into a fine dining restaurant and like kind of what that meant, and like what she had to go through, which I thought was also pretty good. But no, I mean, I enjoy seeing restaurants portrayed, and like kind of coming back to the Bear, that what is it? I think episode 8 in season 1, where it's just a ticket machine is just like nonstop,
Yeah.
and that is like everybody's nightmare.
Yep.
In the restaurant industry, it is like things getting so out of hand.
Yeah.
And just like in a death spiral that you just cannot control.
Nope.
Like I've gone through some openings where it's definitely felt like that, and I remember like one restaurant opening where I literally had to be like, shut the doors, we're not letting anybody else in
Yeah.
for at least an hour. Like let us kind of try to catch up, and then we can kind of get back to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then from a film point of view, that one episode was like one shot, so it's like all one shot.
Yeah.
It's like the audio is always like the ticket machine printing, so I just thought I love that episode, but definitely a little PTSD from that. But
Yeah, I guess that's an important part to point out, is that it's a one shot scene. I mean, it's kind of like, it's something that I don't think I noticed, right? And it's something that I think is really cool that somebody that has a little bit more of an eye for detail like you would notice. And then, I always really love the audio to it also. One of my favorite things about like Kill Bill, let's say, is just how loud the audio is, right? Everything else is silent, but like the boots walking across the wood floor. I just remember like the first time I watched the movie, and it was the only noise. I was just like, oh shit. Like it was just so focused, know? And that's one of the things that I like about The Bear also, is just like how focused it is. It feels like film done by somebody with a Michelin standard, right? It's very tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know that Will Guidara, who was one of the owners of 11 Madison Park, does consulting for it. So
right.
He has some credits there as well. And you can, where I feel like I can kind of tell like the places where I'm like, that was definitely him.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah. You mean where they're crying? No. Awesome. Okay, and so we're at the part where I ask you, do you like this wine? Have you?
I do like this wine.
Yeah. This is not necessarily a blindable wine, nor is it ever intended to be blinded. But do you? Some people have decided that they want to try to blind it, and you can decide to try to blind it too if you want. It's not necessarily on the grid.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, that's interesting because you're already giving me hints.
Well, I'm just saying. I guess that's true. It's process of elimination. It's not these 20 things. It could be 1,000 other things. Not to snuff the court. That's not what I was intending to do.
Yeah. No, not at all. I mean, I don't. I really enjoyed this wine. To me, it seems like, there's some age to it. There's, definitely kind of like this. I feel like it comes from a ripe vintage. Like there's definitely some like really nice kind of fruit qualities to it, but the secondary, tertiary, like aromas are definitely kind of coming out as well. So you definitely get kind of that, all of those like leathery, dried herbs, kind of things kind of coming out the the terroir quality. But it does seem like it's like a little bit higher in alcohol, little bigger, broader wine.
Yep.
To be honest, I'm still a little bit on the fence of like, is this New World or Old World? In my mind. So yeah, so I think that's kind of like right now where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's a good spot to be, right? And I think you touched on all the points that really need to be touched on. And there's obviously, I know you're looking for a white surface and we don't have one, so that also doesn't
I know. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to see the color.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this Italian? Let me see me see that rim.
I guess that's a good question.
Let me see that rim, you know? But yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably maybe think something like Southern Italy, like a little bit warmer, riper, bolder. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's a variety that would come from Southern Italy, I guess. This is a little 11 packs Grenache from Alder Springs Vineyard, Spirit Rock Terraces in Mendo.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's the vintage on that?
11.
11. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, we got this wine. We went to PAX years ago with a close friend of ours, Kayla, who's been on the podcast.
I know PAX, yeah.
Yeah, and we went up to the tasting room, and they had a couple things out of the library, and we grabbed it. And when we got married back in June, we took it out of our bunker at the Presidio, and we just thought, like, we need to drink this, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how much longer it's going to be good. And I'm just like, this wine is still powerful.
Yeah.
Right? Considering that it's a 13-year-old wine, I'm just like...
It is, like, incredible. But you can tell that it's, like, that there's age on it, right?
Yeah,
but it's definitely still, like, muscular for
yeah.
sure.
And the second I opened it, I, like, poured some for Bianca. And, you know, she's not normally, like, have a drink as soon as she gets home, unlike me. You know, I'm like, I get home, I pour myself a glass of wine, and I take my shoes off. Like, that's the process. But I poured it for her, and I go, taste it. And she goes, wow, that's really good. She goes, what is that? And I'm like, Grenache, because our last interview that we had over, I opened younger Carlisle Grenache, which was 15% alcohol, but drank way softer than this.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a meaty boy for sure.
Yeah, and I'm more used to tasting his Syrahs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to buy this. And we're kind of fangirls of Christophe Baron at Cayuse, and we have like a little section that we've set aside in our private collection of those wines, and we've tasted some of them, and it's like 2011 God Only Knows Grenache is way more wound tight than this. You know, it's just like we opened it and we were just like, it's really good, but we wish we didn't open it, you know?
Yeah.
And this, I'm happy that I opened it, but God, I mean, it feels like it could go another decade at least.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I feel like Grenache has such a wide breadth of what it can be, right? Because, I mean, you have a Grenache from Australia and it drinks like a very fruity Pinot Noir, right?
Yeah.
And then you have something like this and it's like completely on the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's a wild grape, certainly. I mean, it's like Syrah, you know, some Syrah can get really heavy into that like olive tapenade kind of character, or right into that like peppery character, or just all blue fruit. And I mean, it's cool to see, I think, and I'm happy to see grapes like this grown more throughout different areas, because I'm just like, we don't really see all the faces of a wine. You know, when it comes from a classic region, we see a very like tailored version of that grape, you know? So seeing it grown in different areas, or seeing it produced by producers that maybe don't follow the DOCG rules all the time, or AOC rules all the time, is cool. It's something I like a lot. So
yeah, no, I mean, I think this is a great one, and like I said, I really enjoy PAX, so like this is great. I have some of his Syrah on our menu, and then I have his Halkin Vineyard project.
Oh yeah, is that his?
It's his and one other person's, and I forget their name. But yeah.
That's where's that? New Zealand? Not New Zealand.
No, it's here, and it's here in the U.S. But
am I thinking of which one am I thinking of? I have this shout out to Blood of God magazine. I have subscribed to Blood of God magazine. They're based in Washington, and I thought I just read an article on it. But yeah, we'll check after this.
Yeah.
But
wait, I haven't heard of this Blood of God.
Yeah, I don't know how many issues they're doing, but I guess it's this music guy from. He's from Washington originally. He was in music in LA and was doing a bunch of stuff in Germany. I was listening to the Black Wine Guy Experience podcast, and he did an episode where he interviewed that guy. And I was like, oh, I've got to subscribe to it. It's like $8 a quarter for an issue.
That's great.
It's like this really cool artistic magazine, a pin, a little headband, a bunch of like little merch stuff that's really cute. It comes along with it. So I've only got my second issue, but I'm a fan of it already. So
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
yeah, it's cool. It's like Noble Rot. Have you subscribed to Noble Rot yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. It's another great one quarterly. I subscribed forever ago. I never got an issue. So I don't know. I should probably
we
reach
need
back
somebody
out.
from Noble Rot to
Yeah,
reach
exactly.
out, please.
Yeah. Sponsor me. No.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, any final thoughts? Any words of wisdom you want to share with people? Any tips and tricks of the trade?
I mean, I don't think any words of wisdom. I think, restaurants are a living, breathing kind of entity that change day to day. So, we're there to hopefully make people happy and be there for their big and small experiences. So, I'm very happy I got into this field, and I'm very happy I got into wine, and I've made probably my best friends, through this.
Yeah.
So it's given me a lot. So I'm just trying to make sure that, I give back as much as I can.
I love that. And I guess that kind of touches into the question I forgot to ask before that, which what does hospitality mean to you?
I've thought a lot about that. And, I'm also the general manager, so I always have to kind of like train, right?
Yeah.
So training and trying to convey that to my staff has, it's kind of part of what we normally do. But I think the simplest answers are usually, the most correct, like hospitality is taking care of other people. Hospitality is making people feel like family. Hospitality is being gracious. Hospitality is treating other people how you would like to be treated, right?
Yeah.
So, there's, a lot more that people can say and everything, but I think at the end of the day, those kind of like basic understandings of what hospitality are probably the closest that we can get, in my opinion, to really, explaining it, because it's always a feeling and it's always going to be personal. But I think that's the closest that at least I can get to it.
That's a good way to think about it too, is not necessarily about unpackaging everything, but about the easiest way to kind of like translate it. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Hernan,
Cheers.
thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers, of course. See you soon.